On this episode, we cover the Joe Rogan Experience number 2516 with guest science writer Rowan Jacobsen. The No Rogan Experience starts now. Welcome back to the No Rogan Experience. It's a show where two podcasters with 224 hours of Rogan experience get to know Joe Rogan. It's a show for those who are curious about Joe Rogan, his guests, and what claims they make, as well as anybody who just wants to understand Joe's ever-growing media influence. I'm Michael Marshall. I am joined by Cecil Cicirello, and today we're going to be covering Joe's June 2026 interview with Rowan Jacobsen. So, Cecil, how did Joe introduce Rowan in the show notes?
It says Rowan Jacobsen is an award-winning science and nature writer. His book, In Defense of Sunlight, The Surprising Science of Sun Exposure, is available now.
Absolutely. So, is there anything else we should know about Rowan?
I mean, he's an author and a journalist, and he's currently doing a book tour. He's written a lot about a lot of different subjects. Mostly, there's a lot of books he has that are about food. So truffles, chocolate, apples, oysters. He feels like one of these people who sort of picks a subject and then sort of figures out all the history and ideas around that particular subject. It's a real popular way to write a sort of journalistic book. And he's done that multiple times. And here he is selling his book about sunlight to Joe. He also writes for like a dozen publications. I'm not going to list them here, but there's many different publications he's a journalist for. So he's an actual bona fide journalist and author.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I first listened to this show and I had some concerns, as we'll go through, some concerns about the material. And then I looked him up and I saw that he's a pretty prolific science writer. And I did genuinely think, am I wrong about what I'm picking up here? Am I completely wrong? Is he right about all this? And it does make you realize just how plausible some of this stuff can sound on Rogan when sort of presented by the right kind of person. But actually going back through again, I think the stuff we're about to talk about is pretty worthwhile covering. So
yeah,
what did they talk about on this show?
He mostly talked about the sun and how sun exposure is good for you, how dermatologists are wrong and they suggest that you should avoid the sun, and how basically every person should probably try to avoid using modern sunscreen and maybe just adopt this sort of beef tallow with zinc in it bespoke sunscreen that Joe uses.
Yeah, exactly. And so we are going to cover all this advice around what you should do about sun exposure in the main event. And in the toolbox, we're going to get towards kind of medical contrarianism and the Galileo fallacy. But before we get to any of that, I want to say a huge thank you to our Area 51 All Access Pass patrons. And those are Dr. Andrew Gibson, online physics tutor, Cindy Lynch, yes, that's Cindy Lynch, Stoned Banana, Don't Thank Me, Your Show Is Just Worth Investment, someone who has now been thanked at least a dozen times against their wishes, Gina Maloney, Matthew Cutler, autistic streamer, twitch.tv /MTC_streams. Every time I want to say autistic Twitch streamer.
I do too. I thought it was maybe when we first started, or maybe I put it in because I'm bad
just going to go with that
things.
From now on, Matthew. You get a bonus extra few letters in there. We're going to go with that. Also, Scott Laird, Chunky Cat in Chicago is at the Nude Beach, Morgan Gordon, Left Hand Voodoo, Sounds Like Eli upped his patron pledge, Fred R. Gruthius, Carissa Gunderson, Hello Kirsty, yes you Kirsty, I'm talking to you, Angie Matke, Stargazer97, Darlene throws ice, not ice cream, into the harbor, Billionaire Oligarchs, Lucy Cortez, Laura Williams, no, not that one, the other one, I'm tired of arguing over which of us likes Eli the most. We just need to agree that he's our greatest best friend ever. No, Megan Bray, Ramtam Tickler, Anchorage is the most diverse city in the country, and the insanity with the names has got to stop. Always a good one to end with.
Really
They all subscribe. They all subscribe to patreon.com/No Rogan. You can do that too. If you do that, you're going to get access to ad-free episodes. And every single week, you're going to get a patron-only bonus segment as well. And this week, we're going to get to Joe's theories on how food poisoning can be contagious. So you can check that out at patreon.com/No Rogan. But now it's time for our main event.
It's time.
So a huge thank you to this week's veteran voice of the podcast. That was M announcing our main event. Remember that you too could be on the show. Just send us a recording of you giving us your best rendition of It's Time. You can send that to noroganpod@gmail.com. And don't forget to tell us how you want us to credit you.
Main event this time is going to be talking about the sun and how the sun is important and how the sun isn't as dangerous as you thought, and sun exposure is very good for you. And much of it is also going to be talking about dermatologist recommendations and this particular writer's battle in some ways, or at least he's getting some sort of messaging from those groups to say, hey, I think you're probably giving bad recommendations out there. So there's a lot of back and forth in this first bit that we're going to be covering, and it starts very early in the show. It's 14 seconds in, and they meet each other on the air.
Very nice to meet you, man.
You too. Thanks for
Thank you.
having me.
And thanks for doing this work, because you want to talk about a subject that's confused so many people. Is the sun good for you? Is the sun killing you? Why does it give you vitamin D if it's bad for you? Why do people get skin cancer if it's good for you?
Yeah, it's super complicated, and the messaging has not sort of admitted that, and that was, a big impetus for the book.
What was your opinion of sun exposure before you started writing this?
So I had inherited the conventional wisdom from the institutions that it was really bad. At the same time, I will admit that my instincts were that maybe it wasn't as bad as they were leading me to believe, because whenever I was in the sun, I felt good. And I live in Vermont. By the time winter was reaching like month 6, I felt bad, right?
Right.
So it's like, there's more here than we're being told.
Yeah, that was my wife's opinion. She's like, the sun can't be bad. It always feels good when you go out there. I'm like, oh. It's a little more complicated than that, but that is the instinct. Like, it feels great when you're in the sun. Like, it's like your body wants it.
Your body wants it. I mean, we now know that it literally triggers the release of opiates in the brain, sunlight. So, yeah, your body wants it, and your body rewards you when you get it.
So what is the issue? Well, let's go back to the beginning. So you had this idea that sun exposure is probably giving people cancer, and sunscreen is good. You need to wear sunscreen, stay out of the sun. So when you started going into the research, what made you shift your opinion?
So it really started for me like 7 or 8 years ago. I was on this like science journalism fellowship. So I was just doing research, and some of those studies hit, the one about opiate release in the brain, and other studies showing that when light hits skin, cognition actually improves. Like your metabolism cranks up a little bit when the body feels sunlight coming in. And I thought, that's interesting. That's all good stuff. Then I came across a couple other studies that seemed to indicate that sunlight could lower blood pressure, which was really interesting. So then, I still had the sense sunlight bad, right? So then I remember just like Googling, like, so how much does sunlight like shorten your lifespan? And like the punchline is sunlight seems to extend your lifespan. So when I hit that, I was like, why are we not hearing this? So that was the beginning.
Okay, so this is the framing really for the whole conversation, and already you'll see some of the themes that we'll be unpicking appearing here. Joe even opens this with a false dichotomy of a framing. Sunlight, is it good or bad? If it's good for you, why does it cause cancer? If it's bad for you, why does it make you produce vitamin D? So we're having this kind of false dichotomy. It's either one thing or the other. There's no space in here for sunshine is good and necessary, but too much for it is bad for you. That is the space that I'd imagine almost every expert in the field would say that they're in, and yet that is the view here that is being unrepresented, apart from in this kind of deep dive that Rowan Jacobsen has been able to get to, absent from the influence of the institutions who aren't telling you, why aren't we hearing this stuff? in here. He's making it sound like the conventional wisdom from all the institutions was always that sunlight is only inherently extremely bad for you. But is that true? Is there anybody who said that sunlight is just bad for you, that you shouldn't go out in the sun, that you should never be exposed to the sun at all? I don't think that's true at all. We've always known that sunshine is good for you in lots of ways, but that you have to take care. That is the conventional wisdom that he is here to, stand up against, essentially.
Yeah. And the conventional wisdom, like you suggest, is this, at least as far as my entire life has essentially been this. I've never heard the opposite of this, or this sort of binary choice that Joe seems to be making out. It seems like most of my life they've said, yeah, getting out in the sun is fine. Just don't get too much. Don't get burned. Those are the things that they're suggesting. Wear sunscreen. That's pretty much the entirety of what I've heard my entire life. And it just feels like such a false framing. It feels like a straw man. Like they're saying, this is what they say. And it's not anything that I think is in what their recommendations are, or in anything that I think most people have heard about the sun.
Yeah, exactly. And yet the stuff that he's saying around sunlight boosting your opiates in the brain and making you feel better, he said, why aren't we hearing about this? He's making out like this is suppressed knowledge. Like there is a they out there, that there is something out there that is stopping you from hearing this stuff. And we'll go on to find out that the something is essentially big dermatology. And that's kind of what he'll talk about in a moment. But it has to be framed in this suppressed knowledge, because otherwise the message that go out in the sun but don't get burned, you can't sell a book off that. It's not sexy enough to publish as a book.
Right. I also, at the end of this clip, there's a moment where he starts talking about how sunlight extends your lifespan, and people have lower blood pressure and they're more healthy when they have sun. And there's a part of me that would love to see these studies, mainly specifically because what I'm interested in knowing is whether or not that just shows a more active person, right? Like my thought is, when he started saying that, was, well, that could be a lot of factors. It doesn't necessarily boil down to this person got sun and this person didn't get sun. It probably has a lot to do with your lifestyle, more than just this person had more sunlight per day than the other people that were in this study.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and something that he mentions later on in the episode. We aren't going to play the clip of it, but he talks about comparing the health of people in the UK to the health of people in Australia. And said in Australia they get so much more sun, and look how much healthier they are on average. And even Joe says, but is that because of their lifestyle? Are they more outdoorsy? So even Joe is able to identify that there is a component of this that is a confounding factor. The people who are getting more sun might be outside, they might be doing more sports or exercise, they might be moving more, and all of that is going to have the same kind of benefits both to your physical health, but also to your mental well-being. Talks about opiates in the brain and mood and stuff like that. Yeah. Exercise is going to be a big confounding factor in there. Right. Which I think even once Joe points that out, Rowan rows back slightly. He'd be like, yeah, that's also a factor in it. So you can see that this sunlight falls down on even a slight amount of inspection, really.
All right. So we're not skipping any tape. This is the next clip. They mention sunlight and they talk about skin cancer.
And so what is the problem? Like, what is the issue with sunlight? Like, when you think about skin cancer, what are the confounding factors that lead to skin cancer? Are we completely aware of that?
It's more complicated than we thought. So sunlight does increase your risk of skin cancer, but depending on the type of skin cancer you're talking about, it's not necessarily like a linear relationship. So yes, in general, too much sun increases your risk of skin cancer. But yeah, the question is, what are the confounding factors? How important is skin cancer compared to these other things? If sunlight reduces your risk of other diseases, how does that weigh against the risk of skin cancer? So it's not the type of thing that can, be done in a 30-second PSA.
Yeah, and this is where we start to see him engaging in what feels like this binary choice again. You're either hiding from the sun completely or you're out in the sun unprotected. But moderate exposure to sunlight is good for you. sunscreen doesn't prevent that exposure. So if you go out in the sun but you're wearing sunscreen, you're going to get the best of both worlds. You're going to avoid yourself getting skin cancer. There's nothing in this that says if you go out and you're wearing sunblock, you're not going to get the protection against these other diseases, because the evidence suggests that isn't the case. That is still going to be beneficial for you. So there is this third way that he's just ignoring, which is go out, get moderate exposure, but cover up or wear sun cream or do something so that you're not out in the heat of the sun at the highest moments unprotected. And he's saying all this, and this has become important in particular for the Toolbox section. He's saying all this as a science journalist. He talked about how he had a fellowship in science journalism. He talked about that already. He's not a doctor. He's not a dermatologist. He's not a medical researcher. He hasn't worked with cancer or with cancer patients. At best, he's going to give us his understanding of what he thinks the evidence base says. And at worst, he's going to give us his inexpert understanding of the studies that he was able to find that supported what he wants to be true in order to make his book seem sexier.
Yeah. And on that note, what you want to be true, this interview, even at the very beginning, and we'll see it as we work our way through, it really feels to me like it's one of those moments that Joe has a thought and he wants to try to confirm his own biases. So what he does is he invites somebody on who agrees with him on this particular topic, and then they have a conversation about it. And these people often are kicking and pushing away the establishment. They're saying the establishment is wrong. I'm a maverick. I went out and figured this out. I know this stuff inside and out. And the recommendations and the institutions that give these recommendations, they're wrong. They're wrong. And I am the one who has figured this out. And Joe really does like people like this. We've seen this time and time and time again on his show. A person who is sort of bucking the system is a person who he thinks has a lot more merit. And the other thing that I think is important too, you got to pay attention to those people and think, we've got to be careful when we think this one person has figured it out. And conventional wisdom, and many, many people have seen this and said, there's nothing to it, or this is this is overblown, etc. We've got to be careful of those people, first off. But then you also got to be careful of people who start saying things like, sunlight is the cure for everything, right? Sunlight makes everything better. And I think we've got to be real careful when somebody has that one simple trick that's going to cure a lot of different things. Often that is something that we need to be more wary of. So those are two factors, I think, that we need to pay attention to as we work our way through this program. I think there is something to people getting out in sun and feeling better about like making them feel better, maybe allowing them to get more in different vitamins. That's also important. But I don't think it's going to be a cure-all. And I think there's a lot of times these mavericks, they step into that cure-all territory.
Yeah, and I think Rowan would probably push back on that and say he's never said that sunlight is going to cure everything or even that it's going to cure anything. But what he does do is open the space for those who are already thinking that's the case, who are already thinking, well, sunlight will cure everything. This interview will support you on that, even though there are times when he will say, well, obviously you don't want to burn and obviously you don't want to go too far. And he will roll back from the edge of that. And I would suspect that's because he doesn't believe that sunlight is a cure-all. But this conversation by saying that the experts who warn you about sunlight, well, they are all wrong, and they may even have muddied motivations, which we'll come to as the show goes on, that will sort of give people the space to start questioning the official advice and then head down this kind of other space where it is this kind of cure-all. And the thing that you mentioned there about Joe wanting that maverick on there, one thing's maverick who's going to sort of stand up to the institution things. It reminded me of something I used to talk about when I talked about the way that the media works an awful lot. Because for all that Joe will talk about himself not being part of the media, he'll talk about being separate from the media, doing it his own way. In some ways, he's a pure distillation of some of the worst instincts of the media. And in one of those is the way that the media, naturally, the shape of a story seeks the sympathy towards the smaller person, the smaller party. If you're an independent researcher against an institution of experts, well, the experts are trying to, crack down on you, and you're the underdog here. And the media loves an underdog, and Joe loves an underdog. And I always call it the media hierarchy of sympathy. In that, if you have one lone practitioner standing against the field because they disagree, well, the sympathy is going to go on that one person. And the only way to hijack that hierarchy of sympathy is to find a victim, is to find an end user who's been harmed. And now they're the person who gets the sympathy. The person who harmed them, that lone practitioner, becomes the oppressor. And the experts speaking out become whistleblowers and things. And so in some ways, Joe is a perfect distillation of that hierarchy of sympathy, because if he can find one person who is being attacked by the establishment for being comprehensively wrong, he'll always be on their side, because he'll see himself as fighting for the underdog. And so, it's just interesting that Joe, even in his outsider media ethos, is in some ways embodying some of the worst tenets of the media.
This next clip isn't skipping any tape. It is still talking about sunlight and cancer.
So sun cancer that does cause skin cancer, sun exposure that does cause skin cancer. What is causing it? Why is it happening?
So ultraviolet light, which is the most energy intense part of the solar spectrum, when those photons of light hit your skin, they go inside, right? We absorb all wavelengths of light to a greater or lesser degree. And that super high energy ultraviolet light, if it hits a DNA molecule, it can mess up the DNA molecule, and then that can lead to mutations and skin cancer. Then it can also indirectly cause skin cancer by creating what are called reactive oxygen species, which are free radicals, basically. So it energizes these atoms that start to steal electrons from other atoms and cause a little chain reaction, which is what a free radical is. So ultraviolet light can increase your free radicals, and it can directly damage DNA. So that's why it could cause skin cancer. So it was basically that learning that one fact back in like the 40s and 50s that made scientists start to say, light, skin cancer, maybe we should think about how much sun we're getting.
But this wasn't universally accepted, right? There were some people that even back then thought that sun exposure was very healthy for you. Like, when did we figure out that sun causes the body to produce vitamin D?
Yeah, that was an important part. And it's a big part of the story, I think, because that was really back in the 20s that we figured that out. And then even a little earlier, we realized that sunlight could prevent rickets.
So actually, a lot of this stuff isn't too bad. This is all pretty decent, pretty accurate. He's explained ultraviolet rays' role in causing cancer. That's all well explained. So he clearly is capable of understanding and explaining scientific concepts. Joe then goes on to say it wasn't universally accepted about sun here, that some people thought sun exposure was healthy for you. We thought sun exposure was healthy for you. Nobody ever thought zero sun was the optimal way of being. We've known for quite a long time, as he points out here, since the 20s, we've known for a long time that sunlight is good for you. 100 years now that it can produce vitamin D. We've known for almost as long as that sunlight can cause cancer. So we are in this space where you should just have not too much. Well, here's the thing. If you use sunscreen, you're going to lessen your chance of getting cancer, but you're not going to stop your body from producing vitamin D. I found a few studies on this. I'll link them in the show notes. Here's one in particular. Sunscreens don't prevent vitamin D production, according to a study due to be released in the British Journal of Dermatology. The results of the study are supported by a systematic review of 75 papers on sunscreen and vitamin D. So there's lots of evidence that if you're wearing sunscreen, it's not going to prevent you from getting enough sunlight to produce vitamin D in your body. And that's because we don't need very much sunlight to produce enough vitamin D to meet our recommended daily allowance, a recommended daily dosage, how much vitamin D we need in a day. I checked around a few different sources. Everywhere I looked, generally kind of agreed that the requisite level of vitamin D that we need, we can get that. We can generate that much vitamin D by just getting something like 9 minutes of exposure to sunlight per day. If you're white, fair-skinned like I am in the UK, getting 9 minutes of sunlight exposure per day will cause you to generate enough vitamin D. And the reason that sunscreen, therefore, doesn't stop you getting that is you're not going to have perfect coverage. And eventually, as it wears off, you're going to get a little bit of that UV light getting through. So across the course of the day, you're going to get enough of that sunlight to produce enough vitamin D. If you're a slightly darker skin tone, you've got more melanin in your skin, it might take longer. It might take as much as 20 minutes or even half an hour a day. In the UK, in winter, you're unlikely to get that. And that's why people are advised to top up their vitamin D levels using supplements. that's kind of it, essentially. They'll later demonize supplements in this interview, but basically between the sunlight and the supplements, that's enough to top up your vitamin D. But you only need 9 or so minutes of sunlight each day to get enough vitamin D.
There's always this sort of dichotomy that happens when Joe talks to certain people especially about medicine. It always feels like there's this fight between the ivory tower and the common sense person, right? There's always this kind of fight. And I think that also plays itself out in other arenas that Joe talks about, obviously. There's an idea that there's either I have common sense or I'm book smart. Those are your two options, right? There's a dichotomy there, about a false dichotomy that you're saying you can only have one of those things.
Yeah.
And I think often Joe will lean towards the person who has that common sense, right? Because Joe isn't a traditionally educated person. So I think he leans towards people who have more world smarts, what he would call world smarts rather than book smarts or something. And I think that there is something to that when he's talking about this particular bit here, because he's mentioning, we've known for a long time, and those people who used to work outside knew for a long time that this is something that's good for you. And he's trying to set it up as if there is this group of people who were sort of trying to undermine the conventional wisdom for a long time because they knew better. They knew better through practice. And what we really are finding out, I think, and what we've always seemed to find out, is that the people who interact with, maybe the sun every day, they don't know as much because they haven't studied it. What they've done is experienced it. And that's a totally different thing. And I think Joe what he wants to do is just award those people sort of a spot at the table to say they have a valid opinion as well. And I think that's a real dangerous thing to do when you're talking about stuff that can give people cancer.
Yeah, exactly. And I think some of this type of conversation, some of this will show the danger, because even that last clip there, I mean, he wasn't particularly egregious. He was quite correctly describing how cancer works. So this kind of gives him a grounding of science journalist, done a fellowship, understands his way around things, can explain scientific principles. But this can be dangerous, because not long after this, and it's a clip we're not going to include, Joe talks about maybe you can biohack your body with injectable peptides in order to give you protection from skin cancer, which is incredibly inadvisable, especially when you can just wear sunscreen. But don't inject yourself with stuff that hasn't been proven to work in order to prevent you getting skin cancer when you can just cover up. And then when he's responded to this, rather than point out that that's an incredibly dangerous idea and we don't know what's in the peptides or what effect it can have on the body or the long-term dangers, Rowan explains that, that can essentially work. And so he's already got this, he's set himself up as having this maverick sensibility that we'll cover more, and a scientific kind of understanding and ability to explain science. And therefore people are more likely to listen to him. Yeah. And then he's like weakly endorsing the idea of injecting yourself with unproven chemicals in order to prevent yourself getting skin cancer.
Okay, so this next clip, we're skipping a few minutes ahead, and they start talking about different skin types and the dangers that different skin types face when they receive sunlight.
So how much of a factor is skin type? Like people that are pale or have freckles and red hair and blonde hair, like how much of a factor is that in skin cancer? And can they mitigate that by like gentle, slow exposure, like a little bit here, a little bit there, and slowly build up?
Yeah, huge. Like skin type is kind of everything. People who have really dark skin basically don't get sun-induced skin cancer, almost never. And the authorities don't tend to talk about that because they want to have like these one-size-fits-all recommendations. But those recommendations to basically always avoid the sun are written for the super fair people, especially if you have red hair, orange freckles. Then you actually have a mutation in your melanin gene that makes you super susceptible to skin cancer from sunlight. So if you've got that phenotype, lots of moles, red hair, freckles, you do have to be really careful. And you can only do so much. Like you're not going to tan that much anyway. Your melanin's just different. Everybody else, you're much less susceptible, and you can tan. You can make more melanin pretty easily through tanning.
So he's talking about skin cancer, how it is much rarer with people when you have darker skin. But when he says that people basically don't get sun-induced skin cancer, that's actually really bad advice because it is less common, but it can be more deadly because you're less likely to be looking for it, and therefore when you catch it, you're going to catch it much later. And that's part of the reason that you're going to catch it later is because of this idea that if you are a person of color, you're not going to get skin cancer. According to sources that I've read, you are still possibly going to get it, but it's likely being the parts of the body less likely to be exposed to UV rays. So places like soles of the feet, palms of the hand, underneath the fingernails, even things like that, those spaces can be quite prone to it. And so it's rarer, but you need to be aware of it. Otherwise, catching it late is so much more dangerous. And messaging like this is actually going to prevent people from catching it in that kind of way.
Yeah, and this isn't the only time. This is the only, I think maybe the only clip or one of the only clips where we play where he very specifically says, if you have darker skin, you don't really have to worry about it too much. But he says it multiple times throughout this episode. We only decided, I think, to keep one or two of these clips, but there's many times that he comes back to this to say, yeah, well, if you're darker, you just have natural protection. I also did some searching on this, Marshall. You're absolutely right. This is not something that you probably should be saying to people. I want to read. This is from a article on skincancer.org. The numbers of skin cancer cases are far lower in people of color than they are for white people, but when the skin cancer does occur in skin of color, it tends to be diagnosed at a later stage and has a worse prognosis. The estimated 5-year melanoma survival rate for Black patients is only 70% versus 94% for white patients. So it's just harder to find, and then they diagnose it later, like you suggested, right? And then it also says here, there's a false belief that melanin is more protective than it really is. As mentioned, eumelanin, the type of melanin that's predominant in skin of color, does absorb some ultraviolet rays that hit the skin, which may allow it more leeway in the sun, but the darkest skin tone only provides an equivalent of SPF 13. And often when you're going out of the house, the SPF on your sunscreen is way higher than that, way higher. So it's again, it's something that you got to be careful with. You can't just say this thing is fine, because then you're saying to a whole group of people that they don't have to worry about something that could actually kill them.
Yeah, exactly. And then notice then that there's this hint at something that there's something awry institutionally. He's saying that the authorities won't tell you of the differences in skin color and how much sun exposure you're allowed to have and how much danger it can inaccurately be. They won't tell you that because they want a one-size-fits-all solution. But what I've read just doesn't bear that out at all, because pretty much everywhere that I've read has said people can be more susceptible to burning and skin cancer depending on your skin type, and therefore you need to be taking extra care if you're more likely to burn. And I think that makes sense because the authorities typically don't want people to get cancer. They want to give, that's their motivation here. There's no motivation other than, he's making out like the authorities don't want to, or the institutions don't want to give anything other than a one-size-fits-all solution. But to what end? To minimize the number of web pages they have to make it so that their leaflets don't have to contain too many different messages.
Yeah.
What they want is a message that's as accurate as possible and as easily as understandable as possible. So they may simplify it in order for it to have as much broad appeal as possible, but they're not making out that everybody's exactly the same. But their only motivation here is to make sure people don't get skin cancer. So yeah, I think they're trying to throw out accurate information, and you can contrast that to what we'll see from Rowan throughout, that he's not necessarily as worried about the accuracy of the information and the clarity of message, and that is leaving space for people to interpret this as being way more endorsement for unprotected sun exposure, to the point where he's even said, it's going to give you skin cancer, but is the risk of skin cancer or the danger of skin cancer, does it outweigh the benefits you get against other diseases? He's making you weigh up on a set of scales having skin cancer against something else when the authorities don't want the institutions don't want you to have skin cancer in the first place.
It almost feels like Joe and he throughout this episode confuse recommendations for prescriptions, right? It almost feels like they're confusing these things. Like, well, that's not good for me. And it's like, nobody said it was good for you. Nobody said it was perfect for you. Nobody had that. It's made because in some ways they have to sort of do a lowest common denominator where they say, we're going to say this thing and that will protect the largest group of people with a very quick statement. So I can just say, hey, you should wear sunscreen and limit your sun exposure so that you're not constantly in the sun without any kind of protection. And that is an easy thing to say instead of, looking at each person individually and saying, well, you know what? You actually have darker skin, so you might not have to use it as much, or you actually need to be out in the sun more, et cetera, et cetera. That's all like individual stuff. It's not wide blanket stuff. And they seem to be confusing it or purposefully confusing it in a way to make it seem like these people don't want you to do this thing.
Yeah, and it's like the advice on alcohol, that you only allowed to drink you're advised to drink no more than a certain number of units. Now, that's going to differ. How much damage alcohol is going to do to you is going to differ depending on your size, on your weight, on your other aspects of your physiology. But it's not like on the back of every beer bottle, they're going to have like a big chart of exactly how tall you are and how much you weigh and how much exercise you do and say, well, this is how much. They give you an overall figure. That's good. That's about right for most people. And you're absolutely right that Joe and Rowan are taking this from the other direction. They want this to be much more bespoke or make it seem like any kind of broad advice is some sort of attempt to pull the wool over your eyes, because they'll talk later about outlier people as if people who are, and we'll see, someone who can tan an awful lot and not get skin cancer, as if they in some way prove anything about the risk of skin cancer because they're an outlier. Yeah.
The person who gives you that bespoke information is your doctor, right? That's the person who you go see and you say, hey, you know what? I don't feel like I'm getting enough sun. And then they can do the things to look at you to make a decision on whether or not that's true or not. You can't look at these recommendations in any other way than just recommendations. But I think that they put too much stock into them. I also think too, Joe wants to bring into this later on, and he will, about like sort of big sunscreen, right? Or what are they trying to put in there? What are they trying to protect you from? Why don't they want you to get this stuff? And I think it all kind of has this sort of weird, it's not a conspiracy itself, but it sort of swims with it, right? It's in the muck with it. It's definitely down in there where it's like, they want you to be a little sick all the time. They want you to use this stuff that they're going to sell you. You know what I mean? Like there's constantly that undertone.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there is a tension. I can even feel the tension in covering this episode, in that listening to it through, it feels like there's some really bad advice in here, but in individual little segments, it might not stand out as being particularly bad advice. And in some ways, that's what makes this potentially pernicious. Because when we cover RFK talking about HIV denial, I mean, every single person could listen to 10 seconds of that and be like, that is awful. Whereas I think there's something more subtle about this, that there's fewer spots where what he's saying is actively dangerous or actively wrong, but the overall impression of it, the synthesis you'll make if you listen to the whole thing and then boil it down to your take-home messages will be, I shouldn't trust the recommendations that are being given. I should sort of be more free and loose about the sun. Whereas I know for a fact that I am quite paler skinned than a lot of people, than other people. I can sustain being in the sun for less amount of time before I will burn, and that is bad, and therefore I need to take more precautions when I'm around the sun. And I know that through having access to accurate information about the sun. I don't know that through listening to this and taking what Joe and Rowan have said. I know it through my own experience of having been around the sun, but also the accurate information I've been getting from, dermatologists and science communicators and health communicators. And so, I may vary around what the actual recommendations are to maybe take more precautions than I ought to because of my skin type. There's no amount of me being in the sun quite often that's going to top up my melanin level above a certain amount of protection. I am just not going to get that brown that quickly to a point where it's going to protect me from the sun. And accurate access to information is what gets you to that understanding. And this kind of don't listen to big dermatology isn't going to help with that.
So they bring up I guess it's like a potion. What is this stuff? The colloidal silver stuff that they take. It's like a I don't want to call it a supplement because it's not. It's like a cure-all type of thing that people take.
So where this kind of comes from, they started talking about injectable peptides at this point and how you can inject yourself to change your skin color to be protective from the sun. I mentioned it before. They're relatively warm about that. And in doing that, they break off to talk about a guy who injected himself with so much colloidal silver, which is an alternative medicine treatment designed to treat all sorts of things.
Yeah, and this person eventually, you'll find out what happens to him when they took too much.
Do you remember that there was a guy, God, I think it was on Oprah or one of those shows, where he was taking, was it silver.
Yeah, colloidal silver.
That's right, colloidal silver, and his skin turned blue permanently, like a Smurf.
Yeah,
poor guy.
Yeah,
and he wound up dying. Yeah.
And how did it kill him?
I don't know if it killed him, but I believe he died young. That's homeboy. Not good.
Man.
Yeah,
no, that's just not a good look.
You would think you'd start turning a little blue, and you'd go, "Hey, maybe I need to back off this colloidal silver."
Papa Smurf dies.
Yeah, I mean, what the fuck, dude? That guy. I mean, maybe he could have gotten some melanotan and evened that out, and just been a nice chocolate, like a bluish chocolate.
I mean, he looks delicious. I'll say that.
Yeah, this is Argyria, the rare disease that turns people blue, caused by a buildup of silver in the body, which discolors the skin. Wow. 2013. He died from unrelated causes, whatever that means. I mean, anybody's taking that much colloidal silver, you're probably making a lot of other mistakes.
I mean, yeah, like...
You're a risky dude.
So many options.
This episode is brought to you by Ketone IQ.
Had to leave that in.
It's so beautiful.
It's perfect. You could not write that. It's too perfect. We're right here mocking someone for injecting himself or for ingesting something that was untested and dangerous to him, and we cut from that to an ad for a supplement. Like, Jesus Christ, Joe. But just look at what this clip is. This came in the middle, as I said, about this discussion about whether it's a good idea to inject yourself with melatonin. Hang on. Melanotan. That's what it was. A peptide called melanotan. Right? Whether you inject yourself with that in order to up the amount of melanin in your skin in order to protect you from skin cancer. Take that rather than doing sunscreen. And that's the conversation they're having about whether these peptides are a good idea or not and whether you should be doing that. And they actually seem like they're recommending that. And in the middle of that, they mock a guy who took something untested and it ruined his life. And he did die of something unrelated. I think he had a pneumonia and then he died of a heart attack. But nevertheless, he's like in the middle of mocking this guy and blaming him for his own death, for what he did to fuck up his own body. We cut to Joe pumping a random supplement. How is this different from talking about this tanning peptide to mocking the colloidal silver guy to talk about ketone IQ? These are all products in the same space, but two of them Joe's on board with. And the third, he will mock you if you take it, even if it leads to your life being ruined. The ad even includes a line from Joe saying, "I've been studying ketones for years, and I'm telling you this stuff is great. My brain works on another level when I take it. There's never been a better time to try it out yourself." But yeah, if you take that and it turns your skin blue and then you die, Joe will be on the show here taking the piss out of any news stories about what you did to yourself. This could so easily come off as like complete contempt for his audience. Well, they're rubes and they're fools if they buy this stuff. But I don't think it is that, because Joe himself is on all sorts of supplements. Yeah. So he can't even see that he is in the group that he's ridiculing here.
Yeah, it's funny because when he's making fun of colloidal silver, the first thing I thought of was this, because he's sort of making fun of this guy for taking something that's untested. Yeah. And then I just remembered Joe during COVID and all the things he did and all the things he took that were untested. And then all the things he touted on his program very specifically for people to take as well to try to combat COVID or prevent COVID. I'm thinking of ivermectin. I'm thinking of all the other stuff that he sort of did that he made a suggestion that this is going to help prevent or stop COVID from injuring you. And it's like none of that stuff was tested, just as much as the colloidal silver isn't tested, but you seem to be fine with
ivermectin is
that.
Tested, before someone picks up that. Ivermectin is obviously tested as an antiparasitic. So
ivermectin is a great drug for what it treats.
Yeah, that's exactly. It just doesn't treat that.
Okay, that's not COVID, okay? And what he was taking it for was for COVID. What I'm saying is like, it's got the same sort of track record when you talk about whether or not it's effective for a certain thing. And it wasn't effective for COVID, and we've seen that time and time and time again when they did multiple tests on it to see if it was not. That's all I'm saying. Yeah, but great correction. Thank you, Marsh. I appreciate that. That's good. The other thing I want to point out too, this particular ad, I listened to this whole ad. Now, this ad is selling time to the previous light heavyweight UFC champ, right? So they're selling ads. This guy who owns this company, he is the previous champ or maybe the current champ, I'm not sure, John Jones, he's the guy who used to be the champ of the UFC in the light heavyweight division and the heavyweight division. So he's like a UFC guy who's buying time from Joe. I don't think you should get your supplements when there's a chance you could win fingerless padded gloves on purchase, okay? Get your supplements somewhere else. Maybe pick a different place. I don't know.
So the Ketone IQ is fronted by a guy who's a UFC fighter.
In the commercial, I didn't like go and search, but in the commercial, they talk about how this is John Jones' company. Yeah. All right. So now they start talking about melanoma.
Not all melanomas are caused by the sun. There's most probably are, but it gets really weird with melanoma. It's associated with burning, with like intermittent sun exposure. Like you work in an office all year and then you go to Cancun and get fried. That's a pretty good recipe for melanoma. History of sunburns also will double your risk. Chronic exposure, where you have an outdoor job every day, lower than average risk of melanoma. So
really?
Yeah, so it gets weird.
Like landscapers or
Landscapers
something
have, outdoor workers have a lower incidence of melanoma than office workers.
Wow.
And we don't hear that.
No.
Okay, so what you take away from this clip is that if you're working outdoor all the time, you're less likely to get skin cancer. I think that's what people would take away. That's certainly what Joe is taking away here.
Sure.
That isn't technically what he's saying, because he's saying melanoma, which is just one form of skin cancer. There's basal cell, there's, I think it's squamous cell, or I forget exactly how you pronounce it, but there's different types of skin cancer. Melanoma is just one of them. Now, if you're taking away that if you're working outdoor all the time, you're less likely to get skin cancer, that isn't true. The reason we don't hear that often is because it isn't true. I found a study that said, compared to office workers, outdoor workers had significantly higher mortality for skin cancer in both men and women, although it was specifically looking at non-melanoma skin cancers. So it may well be that melanoma is just of the different types of skin cancer, that's the one you're less likely to get if you're an outdoor worker, but you're way more likely to get the other forms of skin cancer, and you're way more likely to die from it. I found something from the Chartered Institute of Horticulture advising their workers, because 12% of their workers have been diagnosed with some form of skin cancer. And if 12% of your workers are getting skin cancer, there is something about the job that's going to lead them to be getting that, because that's way higher than sort of background population. I found an analysis from the Dermatology Times that concluded, this is a quote, chronic sun exposure is strongly associated with melanomas occurring on habitually exposed sites, particularly the head and neck. Outdoor workers appear to have lower melanoma incidence on covered sites, but higher rates on areas that receive cumulative UV exposure. But they went on to say overall melanoma incidence and mortality may even be lower among outdoor workers, likely reflecting the influence of different melanoma subtypes and exposure patterns. So essentially, different types of cancers you're going to be getting as a result of your work here. But when it comes to melanoma in particular, you may be less likely, but not other forms of cancer. And they finished with, clinicians and occupational health professionals should continue emphasizing preventative strategies for outdoor workers, including sun protective clothing, shade, and sunscreen. Even if the precise contribution of occupational exposure to melanoma remains uncertain, the benefits of UV protection in preventing keratinocyte cancers and other sun-related skin damage are well established. So melanoma is just one form of skin cancer. I'll do just a couple more things here. I found another study from Denmark. It studied 2.9 million people across 20 years as a median. And it confirmed that occupations where you're exposed to the sun more often are associated with a higher incidence of non-melanoma skin cancer. And it concluded, given the global rise in NMSC, non-melanoma skin cancer, these results underscore the urgent need for workplace sun protection policies and interventions. So, it might be true that people who work outdoors all day are like less likely to get melanoma. It may also be true that people who do that or who work outdoors all day are more aware of the fact that they're more liable to get skin cancer and therefore take steps to mitigate getting skin cancer. Because if he's saying that actually if you're outdoors all the time, you're less likely to get melanoma, well, it might well be because you know you're out all the time and so you're covering up, you're wearing a hat, you're putting more sun cream on. And the office worker who just happens to be spending an hour on the beach or 2 hours on the beach doesn't spend as much time out there, isn't as used to the sun and gets burned. So it may well be that that's also a confounding factor. But from all the research that I could see, for cancers other than melanoma, being outside, working outside all the time puts you at a much higher risk. And then for melanoma, it's unclear, but it may also be that your behavior protects you from melanoma, not just that repeated sun exposure is protective. So I think this is where the messaging from Rowan is starting to muddy the water, because he may well be thinking, I never said anything about any of the forms of cancer here. I was talking about melanoma. But is that what Joe's hearing? Is that what the audience is hearing? I don't think so. I think they're hearing the more time I spend habitually out in the sun, the more protected I am from skin cancer. And that is a 180 of what the evidence tells us.
Yeah, and they don't clear this up. This is not a follow-up, because there's no follow-up question like you just had, which is, well, what are you talking about when you say, and what about non-melanoma skin cancer? There's none of that. That's just, Joe says, wow, I didn't realize that was true, and then they move on to the next topic. Yeah. There's never any follow-up to this.
And that feels like the kind of thing that if you're a science journalist looking to write a book and you found the study on melanoma that tells you that, you go, wow, this is a really interesting finding. Because you're not looking at the overall evidence base. You're looking at this one study that confirms the thing you were thinking about. And you don't bother going looking, what about other forms of cancer? Because that's not going to be the question that you're answering here. So I think this is kind of the cherry-picking nature of a broken filter here.
This next clip, this is talking about a person who suns themselves a lot. And this was the anecdote that Marsh had talked about a little earlier.
But you remember, George Hamilton, like the actor, Mr. Tan? He was all about that. I just the other day, I was like, how's he doing? 87 and ridiculously healthy right now.
Really?
Yeah, he's going strong.
Yeah, I met that guy. He did an episode of News Radio once. Yeah, he was tan as fuck. Yeah, that was his thing.
That was his thing. It became, what he was known for. And he's still going.
So he's still tan?
Yeah, you should see him. He looks great.
What does he look like? Pull up a photo of George Hamilton.
I mean, great for an 87-year-old.
Yeah. Look at him. Still tan.
Yeah. This is just an individual anecdote. There's a guy who tanned a lot. He's doing fine. But this isn't how we do science. And the thing is, we know this isn't how you do science, because later we'll see another case study that he doesn't like. And his point will be, well, that's just one guy.
Yeah.
So how tanned George Hamilton is and how much skin cancer he has tells us nothing about how much exposure to sun has a contributing factor to skin cancer and how much tanning regularly will avoid it. It's just completely irrelevant. This one guy is could well be the outlier who, in the lottery of life, every bullet missed him.
I don't know if it happened during your lifetime in the UK, but over here in the States, during my lifetime in my state, they instituted seatbelt laws. So when I was growing up and very young, there was no seatbelt law where you had to wear a seatbelt. That wasn't a thing. And when I started driving, and a little bit afterwards, was when they started instituting seatbelt laws in my state, in Illinois specifically. And they would have these dragnets where you'd get caught and then you get a ticket and that sort of thing. And then a bunch of people were getting tickets initially because there was this sort of common wisdom that a lot of people would say is, well, I don't wear a seatbelt because I know a guy who got thrown from a car once. Right? He got into an accident, he got thrown from the car, and he was fine afterwards. And that was the story you heard from so many different people. And you're like, yeah, that can happen. I'm sure it can happen. I'm sure it has happened. I'm sure there has been a person who was thrown from an accident and didn't get serious injuries because that particular set of circumstances helped that one person. That's nothing. That's literally nothing. That's just the incident of one person getting thrown from a car. You wouldn't say that over a million accidents. It's better to get thrown from your car. It's because it's statistically not. But that's the problem with these sort of anecdotes is they see this one thing and they think, well, that should be the rule, and it's not the rule.
Yeah, and the way that this always comes up in my experience is, well, like literally with my grandma, she smoked a pack of cigarettes a day, and she never died. When she died, it never had cancer in her life. She died of a infection when she broke her hip. It's like, well, therefore smoking's fine because she smoked all the time and she just never got cancer. But it's just genetic lottery sometimes, or it's just random chance. These outlier cases. We could line up 1,000 grandmas next to who did get cancer, who smoked just as much. And those ones aren't interesting because it's the dog bites man rather than man bites dog. And again, it's Joe's kind of embodying the worst instincts of the media because the outlier story is the one that's interesting to the media and especially interesting to Joe.
Yeah, this guy's a tanning maverick. Yeah, absolutely.
He is. Yeah.
All right. Now, this is the contrasting opinion. We skip ahead to what Marsh was saying. He hears about another person. Well, this is the other person who hears about.
But we do see like truckers that have you ever seen those?
You're talking about that famous photo.
Yeah.
That is a crazy photo.
Crazy photo. So what we're referring to is there's a photo of this trucker, and the left side of his face from the sun coming in from the window looks like he's 20 years older on his left side than it is on his right side.
It's like special effects. Somebody melted the left side of his face.
What's that all about? Yeah, there's the guy.
There he is.
That's literally nuts.
Yeah,
that's literally nuts.
Like left side is just sloping off, basically.
His left side looks like a 100-year-old man, truck driver face. Years behind the wheel driving a truck. Damage typically limited to the left side of the face. So it's literally called truck driver face.
Yeah, and now so that photo and that study got used to like scare the shit out of a lot of people, try to keep them out of the sun,
especially people that are vain and don't want that fucked up wrinkly face. Whoa, that's crazy! Look at the difference between. Wow, that's literally bananas. What they're showing back and forth is they're just taking the skin from the left side of the face and switching sides, so you can see how much damage he's received on that side, the driver's side.
Yeah, and so there's a couple of interesting things there. One, that is shocking, but the question to ask is, why doesn't every trucker look like that, right? Like, if that's the problem, why him? Like, because I've been driving in a car for 45 years, and my face is
the same on the left as it is on the right.
So here we have it. We've got this one example of a guy who doesn't look the way that Rowan thinks sun damage should look. And when you see him, he's got really severe sun damage. That's what this is. It's very, very clear that his face looks much, much older on one side, and that's kind of what's happening here. When confronted that, Rowan's instinct is, well, what is it about this one guy that makes him an exception to everyone else? And by everyone else, he's comparing him to himself. But Rowan has said, well, I've been driving for 45 years. Yeah, but you're a science writer, so you're not driving professionally for 45 years. You're driving, you might be commuting, you might be driving to places you need to be, but you're not on the road 8 hours, 9 hours a day. Yeah. So that is the difference here. So he's comparing his own experience to a professional full-time truck driver, transit driver, and saying, well, if I don't look like that, even though this guy's much older than me and drives more than me, then sun damage isn't real. Or sun damage isn't as bad as all that. It must be something about this one guy. So we see his reaction to individual anecdotes completely switches depending on whether the anecdotes agree with him or disagree with him.
Yeah, that's a great observation, Mars, because you could totally hear it in the two different anecdotes, right? You could totally hear the difference of his opinion of these things. And just like you suggest, this feels really damning for a science writer to not realize that the poison is in the dose, right? Yeah. It genuinely feels damning when this person says out loud, well, I've been driving for a long time. It didn't happen to me. And you're like, oh, come on now. That you can't say these two things. And I'm not even saying that this person necessarily, this is because of the sun, right? I'm not even necessarily saying that. I don't even know, right? I didn't diagnose the guy. I don't know. You guys are just looking at a picture. We're just looking at a picture. But for you to say that as a defense, that to me says a lot about your sort of methodology and how you look at this sort of thing. And also just windows in general in cars, they block some of the UV light. So riding around in a modern air-conditioned cab, like with the window up, is more protection than if the window was just down, because it does protect you from some of the UV light. So that might be why when he's asking, why don't we see every trucker look like this? It's like maybe they were driving around in an air-conditioned cab with the windows up, which is a way more common thing now than it was when this person probably was driving years and years and years ago.
Yeah.
More about window glass and ultraviolet light.
But the other thing is, window glass, I think, is actually a really interesting problem to talk about.
Yeah.
Because window glass blocks UVB, but not UVA. And there's two different wavelengths of UV. The UVB is the super high energy one. UVA is a little bit lower. It's kind of on the way to blue. And they used to think back in the day that UVB was the only one that caused skin cancer. And those old sunscreens that we used in the 70s and 80s only blocked UVB. Window glass blocks UVB, blocks only part of the UVA. So anytime you're driving or you're hanging out in a window in your house, you're getting a bunch of UVA. You're not going to burn because UVB is the one that causes burning. But you're still going to get a bunch of UVA, which they figured out like in the 90s does cause skin cancer.
Oh, wow.
So
sun through the windows.
Sun through the windows
is not as good as sun outside.
It blocks the UVB, but the UVA comes through, but you'll never have a burn reaction because of it.
But you might be getting damaged.
Yeah. And
so there might be listeners who are listening to us and thinking, we're being too picky. We're being pedantic. Actually, Rowan's not saying anything quite that bad. Maybe it's not as bad as we're making out. But I think this is an illustration of just how the framing of this conversation is coming across not just to Joe's listeners, but to Joe himself. Because this conversation has been framed in such a way that Joe's thinking here, it's affected his thinking so significantly that when he hears glass doesn't block all of the harmful rays of the sun, what he actually hears in his head is, and comes out with is, so sunlight through a window isn't as good as sunlight from the outside. That is the way he's seeing it. Is that because the window is blocking some stuff and therefore the sunlight isn't as good through a window. What we're talking about is the rays that cause cancer. Some of those get blocked by windows, but not all of them. That's what we should be saying is you can still get skin cancer through a window. What Joe hears is, well, the sunlight I'm getting through a window isn't as good as the stuff in the outside world. That's the effective framing here. And that's why I thought this is definitely an episode we needed to cover.
Yeah, it's subtle in its issues, right? And the issues that it has are very subtle. But if you listen very closely, you can hear not only him, but like you suggest, the audience is getting the wrong message sometimes. I think Rowan very quickly corrects him, right? And says, no, what you're misunderstanding. It's not better, it's bad both ways. It's just like, but I think like even Joe and maybe his listeners are hearing the same things, and it's important to stop that and pay attention to that. More on truck driver face.
So do you think it's this guy's particular genes?
There must be something weird about that guy.
Right. Well, how many instances of truck driver face do they have?
I just Googled the condition, and it's only him coming up in the photos.
So this is the thing.
One lady, but she clearly doesn't seem to have the same issue.
There's a lot of truck drivers that have been doing it for 50 years.
No, that's not the same thing.
Oh, that's not real. Is that real?
It's a different thing. She's got something wrong with her jaw.
Oh.
But it's coming up as the same condition. Unilateral dermatoma. I can't.
Oh, so she had some sort of cancer that made its way into her jaw?
But I can't. I would have assumed that more cases would pop up, but it's literally just him.
So that's the thing. It's the real question is, what's up with that dude?
Yeah. Interesting.
Different truck. That's not.
So, this one dude, he's just a bad example. This one dude, what's the problem with him? That's the way that Rowan responds to it when it's this one guy. We shouldn't put any stock in this single person because there might be something about this one guy because it disagrees with Rowan's beliefs. But earlier, when we're talking about how the guy used a tanning bed into his 80s and never got cancer, oddly, we weren't told to ask, well, what is it about that guy? What's interesting about that dude? Because that agreed with Rowan's beliefs and therefore is a good example of something.
Yeah, it's picking which anecdote to believe is just confirmation bias with bad confirmation. That's all it is. Okay, so next up, and this is the last clip in our main event, they're talking about sunscreen.
Wow. So sunscreen. Now, I use a natural sunscreen when I use it at all. It's this stuff that's like beef tallow based and has zinc in it. It's very white and obvious. Mm-hmm. You know, it's the spray stuff goes on clear. You can't even tell you have it on.
Yeah.
But it's very effective. But I'm always like super hesitant. I'm like, what's in that stuff that we're going to find out 15, 20 years from now? Like if it can block the sun, so it's a chemical and you're spraying this chemical on an organ, which is your skin. Yeah. So your skin's absorbing it. I'm like, what's going on there?
And they used to say, oh, no, it's not absorbed very much. And then the FDA, CDC did studies a few years ago and discovered that it's absorbed at very large amounts. Like
yes.
It turns up at high doses or higher doses than they would like it to in blood, breast milk, urine, you name it.
And what specifically turns up and what's dangerous about it?
So they're suspected to be hormone disruptors, all those classic chemical filters like oxybenzone. There isn't much proof that they're dangerous in the amounts used, but they definitely are absorbed at much higher rates than we thought. And the FDA has refused to approve them as safe, pending more testing. And nobody's done the testing.
Oh.
But they're about to get phased out anyway. Like just as of a couple months ago, the government changed the rules and is going to let in, for the first time in 30 years, new ingredients, which they've been using in Europe and Asia and Australia for decades. And the sunscreen companies have been asking to use them. and haven't been allowed to, but now they're finally going to get to use one of the main ones.
So yeah, Joe Rogan doesn't use proper sunscreen. He uses a Maha alternative made of beef tallow because of course he does. Because of course Joe Rogan uses beef tallow sunscreen. He's using it with zinc in, but that's what he's using here. But I think this shows why this conversation could be dangerous to the audience that's listening, because they have been advocating being out in the sun for a prolonged period of times. They've been minimizing the risk of skin cancer. And they've been telling people that conventional sunscreen is full of chemicals, but there's this beef tallow alternative that you may or may not have access to, but the ones that are out there that you can buy that from the stores, those are full of nasty chemicals. But it's okay because being out in the sun is fine. So maybe you don't need that much protection. That's the overall message. And it may not be individually, any one of those clauses may not be what Rowan came on this show intending to tell people or to have people come away with, but that's the overall effect. And they couch some of that here. Rowan is saying, even in this part, that there are modern sunscreens that are on the market that are fine. But I think the average listener is still going to take away the message that they should beware the chemicals and use beef. I think that's the message they're going to come away from this, really.
Yeah. And I think it's so easy to slip one past the goalie on a lot of people who believe a lot of similar things, because when the thing is all you have to do is just say chemicals, even though those chemicals are used individually in both of these things, right? Both of them, like you suggest, use zinc to block the sun. One just uses a different sort of oil to put it on there. One of them's beef tallow and one of them's like the other oil, but they're both using the same chemical in order to do this. And so but if you say that out loud, that sort of triggers in a lot of people's brains, oh, there's something wrong, right? Even though they never really tell you what's wrong or why it's wrong. They're saying, oh, it's being absorbed. Well, is that bad? Is it bad that it's being absorbed more? Oh, we don't know. Okay, well, why should I care then? Like, what's the level at which I should care about this based on what you're suggesting? And the thing is like, it's just sort of giving you this sort of sense that something's wrong without actually telling you what is wrong. And I think that's a real dangerous thing to do. And it reminds me of how they treat the vaccine. Not specifically Rowan. I'm not talking about him, but I'm saying like this group of people that are very vaccine hesitant, they can't just be like, I don't want to take the vaccine. They have to sort of have this sort of, it's not just that they doubt it works. It's that it also has to harm you too. Right? So there's like another level at which it has to attack. It's not just that wearing sunscreen isn't necessary, or it's better to get more sunlight or whatever. It's now there's another line of attack, and that is that sunscreen itself may be dangerous to you because of the things that are going into your skin, because your skin is a giant organ. So it's just like another avenue that they're using to sort of make it seem like conventional wisdom is wrong. Joe does use sunscreen. He says he uses sunscreen, but it just tastes like a McDonald's French fry. And then he's spending this entire show making people seem sunscreen hesitant.
Yeah, exactly that. Also, he says about how this sunscreen, he said it's very white and obvious. And I think very white and obvious reads like a Google review of Joe's guest list.
That's amazing. When he first started talking about it, I was like, oh, please say you cut an elk open and just crawl in it like a tauntaun to protect yourself from the sun. Please. All right. Now we're going to move on to our toolbox section.
But it's a tool. It's a tool in the toolbox, and we need a lot of tools.
Okay, so for the toolbox this time, Marsh, we're doing Galileo fallacy.
Yeah, it's something it's kind of a mix of both kind of medical contrarianism and the Galileo fallacy. So medical contrarianism essentially being like, well, everybody thinks X, all the institutions, all the experts, they think this, but I disagree. They're all wrong and I'm right. And that kind of comes into, it's this maverick idea, and it comes into the Galileo fallacy, which is essentially, they laughed at Galileo. So yeah, Joe, he really likes to platform people who disagree with the mainstream. He likes to treat them like they're the ones who are in the know all the time. They run counter to what every expert thinks, so they must be onto something. That people laughed at Galileo, but it turned out he was right. So therefore, we should listen to all the outlying voices, all the ones on the fringe, because they're the ones more likely to be right. And it's essentially the reason that this doesn't work as a mode of thinking is, they called Galileo crazy, But they also said that of a lot of people who were crazy. So the fact that you get called crazy doesn't mean that you're right. It's not the badge of honor to have here. And we actually see this happen throughout this conversation. Joe even talked about how dermatologists deny Rowan's points, but no, Rowan is just presenting the data. And Rowan even chastises the dermatologist about how they only care about their micro specialties and how they're just not willing to entertain things out of their field. And of course, he's saying this as a journalist who doesn't have a specialty, who doesn't have a field. He's not a scientific expert. He's not done a science degree. He's not a medical researcher. He's entirely outside. He lacks even a micro specialty, really. And what we're going to see throughout this, and we'll see it in the toolbox here, is that Rowan has managed to figure out that all the experts are wrong, and also not just about sunlight, but about other fields as well. And the question we need to ask is, well, how likely is it that this one guy, who is a science writer, has managed to be right about sunlight when all the experts are wrong, but he's also right about multiple unconnected fields, and all the people who work in those fields are all wrong and he's the one who's right? Is it likely that he's the one who's this medical contrarian, this maverick, this Galileo figure has overturned conventional wisdom in multiple different areas? Or is it just that he's wrong?
This first clip is about a half an hour into the program, and this is when Joe asks Rowan, was there any pushback on any of this research that you presented?
That's the time he asks that.
Yeah, the first time he asked this question.
Was there any pushback on this research? Like when you first started examining this and realizing that sun exposure has a lot of benefits, were any dermatologists saying, hey, this is dangerous information, you shouldn't say this?
Hell yeah. I've been denounced multiple times by the American Academy of Dermatology, like officially. They send an official letter when I write an article, and they say, nobody should be getting any sun exposure.
That's their opinion? No one should be getting any sun exposure, regardless of the benefits, the vitamin D,
No sun exposure without protection from either sunscreen or, clothing.
Wow.
And if that makes you vitamin D deficient, take a pill. So that's what needs to change, because those pills haven't panned out in tests. They don't work like natural D does for whatever reason.
Really?
Yeah, they don't work at all.
Joe's like, wait a minute, John Jones sold me a pill. What are you telling me about?
Oh, yeah, it's great, because after this, Joe then gets really defensive about supplements, which is quite funny to see. But yeah, Joe's framing this about the pushback here. He's talking about how, I've been denounced by the dermatologists, and therefore you're right because you've been denounced. Being denounced isn't a reason that you're more right. I think this is dishonest framing. The American Academy of Dermatology don't say nobody should get sun exposure regardless of benefits. They say you should protect yourself with sunscreen, limit your exposure, make sure you're wearing protection, cover up, but wear sunscreen. And sunscreen doesn't prevent you getting vitamin D. There's lots of evidence of this. There's lots of research on this that shows that with sunscreen on, you're still going to get enough vitamin D. That said, their advice on vitamin D is to avoid getting it from the sun at all. They say the American Academy of Dermatology recommends that healthy adults should obtain an adequate amount of vitamin D from a diet that includes foods naturally rich in vitamin D or foods fortified with vitamin D, because ultraviolet rays from the sun and tanning beds can cause skin cancer, and therefore they don't recommend getting vitamin D from sun exposure or indoor tanning. So yeah, they are more hardline than I would suggest a lot of other doctors would be. They would say go out and make sure that you're wearing sunscreen, and then you'll get some vitamin D through there. But they're not saying zero sun exposure at all. They're saying wear sunblock, cover up, get coverage.
He even walks it back when he's saying, he said, they said none. He's like, well, they said none, but what they meant to say was that. He even says it in here where he kind of walks it back a little. It's a very different thing between two questions. He gets asked the first question, says they said no sun at all. Did they really say that? No, what they said was no sun without protection. It just feels like from the very beginning, he's making it seem like this group sort of condemned him. What I'd love to see is the Graham Hancock letter. So you remember when Graham Hancock was told by the archaeologists, hey, you're doing this stuff and this is wrong. And then he published the letter. He said, fine, I'll publish this letter and then I'll respond to it. I'd love to see that version happen here. I'd love to see what that letter specifically said. We can't see what that letter said, but I'd love to see what they actually sent to him. Next up, we're still talking about avoidant dermatologists.
So have you had any conversations with these dermatologists that are denouncing you?
No, but I'd like to, actually. I think...
are they willing, or have they avoided them?
They have so far really avoided. Like they just say, we're not ready to look at any of that research.
God, that's so weird.
But I think it's going to change. I think actually, like I said, I think light medicine is actually going to become very important in the next 10, 20 years. And dermatologists are kind of positioned to be like the leaders on that stuff because like skin is the primary like interface with light for our bodies. And, they should be experts on all this. Red light therapy is a big thing now.
Mm-hmm.
And dermatologists are doing that, even though the evidence isn't great for that. But I think there's probably something there. But they should basically, I think they need to be thinking more about all of these different wavelengths of light as healing modalities and how to, work them into like regular like programs.
So, yeah, again, we have this kind of contrarianism here. I'm not sure that I'm buying that they told him, we're not ready to look at any of that research. That's what he says. The dermatologist said about dermatology research. If they did say that, I'd love, as you say, publish that letter. I'd love to see it. I suspect what they said was something quite different to that, but that's the way he's categorizing it here. And I think it speaks volumes to his approach here that he even says, the evidence isn't great for red light therapy, but I think there's something there. So he's saying, like, even though there's no good evidence for it, I believe in it. And I think actually there is some evidence for some red light therapy, but generally speaking, at quite high frequency, quite high intensity. Most of the products that you can buy on the market, like for personal use, aren't going to do anything. It's only at a much higher level of power that they're actually going to have any kind of effect, is my understanding. I know that my colleague, Dr. Alice, did a story on this at Skeptics with a K, and that was kind of the summary there. So there is something there, and the evidence may well emerge, but the fact that he is saying the evidence isn't good, but I still believe in it, isn't ideal. And then he goes further and says it's not just red light. He's looking at all different types of wavelengths of light and how that should be viewed as healing modalities. There is no evidence for that. This is a belief that he's stating in healing modalities of light, absent of evidence. He is going to overturn the medical establishment with his ideas here. He is the maverick in here.
You do have to get a much more powerful red light. The best way to do it is to go to Krypton, where Superman is from, and there's a red sun. And you're just fine. Like after that, and you actually get superpowers when you come back to the Earth afterwards. It's a whole thing. Yeah.
Is that how? Because I know Joe said he managed to cure his short-sightedness with red light therapy into the eyes. Is that like the laser eyes thing with Superman? Was it just like laser? He was getting LASIK from Superman.
It's backwards, though. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. All right. Next up, talking about people who are closed-minded.
What seems so close-minded that these dermatologists aren't willing to say, maybe we're looking at just an insufficient amount of data. Maybe we're looking at this wrong. Maybe the whole thing is much more nuanced, and maybe there's benefits if it's done correctly. I just don't understand why they're not. If there's all this data, which clearly you show in your book that there's a tremendous amount of data, why?
So there's this saying attributed to Max Planck, who's this quantum physicist: science advances one funeral at a time, right? So I think we got to let the old guard die off a little bit, but I guarantee there's a young generation coming in who's going to be really interested in light and how they can use it.
Oh, certainly. Well, I think there's so many conversations available online now from actual researchers and people that have put in the time and put in the work and explored things from this position that hey, maybe the old guard are not correct. And the data seems to show that that's true.
So look at the contrast that they're drawing here. The closed-minded scientists versus the people who've put in the work, people like Rowan who've put in the work to explore things. As if the people with medical degrees got their degrees out of cereal boxes. Those closed-minded scientists have put in the work to obtain a dermatology degree, for example, which is something that you haven't done, mate. You've just written a book, Rowan.
And then look at how he's talking about the data. He's like, oh, there's just so much data in your book, and that should convince people. Joe gets convinced if there's somebody cites something or maybe even doesn't cite something on Instagram. I've seen him watch. We've watched him watch on this program. He will just call up Instagram and watch a whole video where stuff is either sourced incorrectly or sourced badly, and he will just watch it and then look at his guests and be like, see, look at what I just saw. Look at what we just experienced together. This is going to change the paradigm. And I think Joe just doesn't understand that there's a difference in those types of information.
Yeah, exactly. And when it comes to data, he might be talking about scientific data, but a book about how good sunlight is for you that's citing some studies isn't the same as a systematic review of the evidence-based for
right.
what good sunlight has or what sunlight can do. Like, one of these is coming with a very firm conclusion in mind, and the book is that. As for Joe's getting his opinions from people on podcasts and Instagram and YouTube, we might cover it soon, around the same time that this interview went out, like in the sort of the days or the weeks either side of it. He had someone on his show to talk about ancient civilizations across the world and all that kind of ancient alien type stuff. Her qualifications was that she had a corporate finance job until she burned out of it, did some hallucinogens and a vision quest on the side of a mountain and fasted for 3 days, and then started a podcast in 2022, I think, or 2023. And 3 years later, she's on Rogan explaining that the trained archaeologists don't know as much as she does. And he's agreeing that they're right. So that is, it's not just medical contrarianism that Joe is very much attracted to. Any form of Galileoing, he's right on board with.
And there's also this undertone and undercurrent when he talks to Mavericks often about the arrogance of science and how people who study things are arrogant and they don't want to be told something else. And I think like that's just a misinterpretation of how people react when you bring something to them. I'm also reminded of when Terrence Howard sent his proof of something to Neil deGrasse Tyson, and Neil deGrasse Tyson red-penned it and sent it back and said, "You're wrong about a lot of stuff. I know this stuff because I have a PhD in it. You're wrong about a lot of stuff." And Terrence took it as him getting attacked. And I think Joe has a very similar feeling here. Someone knows a lot about this, and when they get told, hey, you're doing it wrong, they take it personally and they take it as a personal attack. And Joe equates that to ego and not just knowing what they're talking about.
Yeah, he does. And then literally a few minutes after this, Rowan explains that, well, all the reason why he's such a maverick, the reason why those dermatologists were waiting for them to die off sort of one funeral at a time and they'll never accept it. He says it's because the people who give out grant money, they'll only give you money for ideas that agree with the mainstream. And that's starting to get into borderline conspiracy theory territory at that point. You know, why don't the people who do this for a living, who do dermatology for a living, why don't they agree with Rowan? It's because their research is controlled by the people who don't want to rock the boat or don't want to accept new ways of thinking about how maybe skin cancer isn't as bad as people think. You know, I think that's not true. I think there is money available for novel ideas. I think there's a lot of research money going to go towards novel ideas, but the more novel those ideas are and the more they deviate from what's been established by decades of research, the stronger a case that you need to explain why you're right and everyone else is wrong before you're going to get that research money. And if you haven't got a strong enough case, then it's quite reasonable that they're not going to fund your crackpot idea.
Next up, let's talk about negative responses.
So the first is sunscreen the new margarine? So that was the first one. And what was the response to that? So, what do you remember the first really negative response and how you felt about it?
So there was an official letter from the AAD. They're very polite, but they're like, here we think this is misrepresenting the information, and we think this is dangerous. If you're telling people that they might benefit from more sunlight, that's dangerous. So that's probably, and then when that came in, I was like, so that needs to change. If we have in our heads that exposure to any sunshine is dangerous, we're not seeing the forest for the trees. We've lost the thread on this one.
So this is that maverick fallacy thing again. Like, this is dishonest framing. I again, show me the letter. Maybe it's published somewhere. I couldn't find it when I initially looked. I just don't believe that the AAD said to him, telling people they might benefit from sunlight is dangerous. I would say the stuff he said before that you're misrepresenting the information and that could be dangerous, I would agree with that. Yeah. But the AAD's position is that exposure to sunlight causes skin cancer, which is bad, and therefore you should limit exposure to sunlight and make sure you're wearing sunscreen. That is all very reasonable here. So I just don't believe that they're saying that telling people there's a benefit to sunlight is dangerous. I think there's more to it than that.
And it feels like these two guys and a lot of people that Joe interviews when they have this sort of maverick idea is that they are upset that someone sort of smacked their hands with the knowledge ruler. They had said something and someone said, hey, now hold on a second, whack, gave them a little whack and said, hold on, you're saying incorrect things and those things could be dangerous. So now what they have to do is sort of reframe the criticism they got to make it seem like these people are attacking them and that this group they actually don't know what they're talking about. And that feels to me like, and it reminds me of how he talked about ivermectin too, when he talked about ivermectin on his show, because he made it seem like everybody was saying, oh, that's just horse dewormer. And then he went on to say, well, it's not, or it's used for anti-parasitic, but it's won a Nobel Prize. No one was saying that he was taking horse dewormer. What they were saying is that people were buying horse dewormer out at the stores because that's how they could get it. They didn't have a doctor that could prescribe it. So that's how they were defining it because that's how the normal person was getting it. But Joe took it as if they didn't know what they were talking about, but they knew what they were talking about. He just didn't want to have to hear the answer. He didn't like the answer, and it made him feel stupid.
Yeah, and the thing is, I imagine he did find someone who was accusing him of taking horse dewormer, maybe someone who was uninformed, or maybe someone who was just joking because they saw other people taking horse dewormer, thought that was a bad thing, and then realized that Joe Rogan was the one directing them towards taking ivermectin that kind of way. He would have sought out the criticism that is the easiest to shrug off and dismiss, and then make that seem like that is all of the criticism. Probably made it seem in his head like that was what all the criticism was, and therefore I'm right, because he can't look to medical professionals who are saying, ivermectin's a great drug, but it doesn't work for this and it's dangerous to tell people that it does. He can't look to that and find any handhold that he can use to throw that away, because so he has to find the easiest thing he can use to dismiss, and then dismiss the lot of it with that.
This next clip's about pushback again.
I keep going back to this you getting attacked thing, and I don't understand how someone could attack you with the data that you're showing, because you're not making any dangerous or any claims or you're not advising people do anything that's reckless.
Yeah, no, I mean, I purposefully have I really haven't. I basically tell people to figure it out for themselves, right? But it's only small amounts of sun exposure that seem to be necessary to get most of the benefits. Like the jump isn't going from zero to some. You don't need it a lot. Nobody really needs a lot. Unless you have really dark skin, then you can probably get away with a lot. So yeah, just a little bit of sun exposure doesn't seem like a crazy recommendation. But it's just because the messaging has been sort of so extreme and unyielding. Like, they've worked for so hard to sort of scare people away from any sun exposure that I think backing that up a little bit is sort of uncomfortable,
I understand, but I mean, isn't history filled with new discoveries and changing courses?
Yeah, and I think it'll change, but
it's going to
be one funeral at a time. Yeah. And it's going to be ugly all the way.
When you do this kind of work, have you discovered any other things that people thought were unhealthy that turned out to actually probably be good for you, at least if used correctly?
You've been a Galileo on this. Have you actually revolutionized any other fields while you're at it? Yeah, here's the maverick fallacy right there.
It's amazing.
We genuinely could have played several of the clips for how often Joe frames Rowan's work around the pushback he's received from the mainstream. There were multiple other clips.
Yeah, no, this is the fourth time he's asked the same question, which is, let's talk about the pushback you received. Can you tell me about the pushback you received? What was the pushback that you received?
Yeah.
He keeps doing it over and over again. And what this question really is can you tell the audience again how this science community will attack you when you're very, very right about a lot of things? And Joe does this because he's felt the same way as this guy, and he wants to sort of reiterate that the science community in general, doesn't matter what field, do this all the time, and that validates his points on all the things he was right about.
Yeah,
and I'm using air quotes when I say right, by the way. He wasn't right about those things, but it's the things he thinks he was right about.
Yeah, and I think, Joe is, it's like he's less interested in hearing the evidence for whether Rowan is right or not about what he's saying, because as far as he's concerned, if the mainstream is upset with you, that is proof that you're right.
Yep.
If everyone else disagrees with you, that means that you're right. And that is the Galileo principle. It's like, tell me again about which people called you crazy and when. Tell me about the people who laughed at you, and that's how we'll know that you're right. And it's interesting because Rowan is saying in here, like Joe said, how could they attack you for this? You're not saying anything. And Rowan even saying that he held back from giving recommendations is essentially what he's saying. I'm just saying I'm not giving people recommendations. This is kind of what he's kind of getting at here. Like they shouldn't be attacking me because I'm not the one telling them how to do anything or what to do. But I'm just here to tell people to figure it out for themselves. But he stopped short of the recommendation, but for figuring out for yourself, he's given them all the reasoning and the motivation to make the decision that is obvious flows downstream from what he's saying.
Yes.
Sun exposure, people say it's bad for you, it's actually really good for you. Sun cream isn't particularly good. You need more vitamin D than that. Skin cancer isn't necessarily as bad as the things you'll get for not having sun exposure. ... figure it out for yourself. I didn't tell you to do anything.
Yeah.
And it'd be a bit like if someone, and we've seen people come on the show to talk about vaccines, and they've said things like, tetanus doesn't really harm anybody as a virus, and it's not actually as a infection, and it's not going to really harm you. People don't get tetanus anymore, and the vaccines are filled with all sorts of things that are bad for your body, and actually diseases were already coming down, the number of diseases, before vaccines were even invented. That's stopping short of saying what you should or shouldn't do when you're asked by a doctor, do you want to vaccinate your child? There's no recommendation in there, but it's pretty clear what the implication is. And so you could have had an anti-vaxxer on saying, well, I never told anybody not to vaccinate. No, but you give them all the reason and all the motivation that would lead them to a natural conclusion here. And the thing is, and this is just a small point, but did it also feel to you, this is like an hour and a half into the interview, that we've kind of reached the limit of Joe's interest in either this topic or this in general? Because I've never seen him struggle this much to keep a conversation going.
Yeah.
He's really at the end of this, he's like, so have you discovered anything else, guys? And even in the 10 minutes before this, he's just spent most of it putting different things into Perplexity and then reading out Perplexity AI summaries verbatim. It's like, I can almost hear him going, how about those Knicks, huh? How's the weather these days? Which route did you take when you drove here? Like all this kind of like the most out of topics of conversation imaginable.
Pretty hot out there today, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so this next clip, this is where we're starting to get into more of the what else are other people wrong about? And this is starting to talk about diet and fat in this next clip.
Yeah, that's such a good question. So the one, like the metaphor that I think we're all familiar with and that I think maps pretty perfectly here is diet and fat, right? Like the 25 years ago, Gary Taubes does that article in the New York Times Magazine, What If Fat Doesn't Make You Fat? And we were still back in that era of, carbs, cut all the fat out of your diet. Carbs are good for you. Margarine, right? The margarine era. The top experts got it 100% wrong back then. And when they got called on it by Taubes and others, Nina Teicholz, you guys have had Nina on.
I've had Taubes on as well.
Oh yeah. Okay. They fought hard and they were totally wrong. And we now, we flipped, but it took a long time and, there was little blood in the water.
So here's another instance where the top experts were 100% wrong, but the thing that Rowan thinks is right. And the thing is, this isn't the subject of this interview. It's not the subject of our show here, so I haven't got deep dive into the claims that are being done here. But diet is just more nuanced than that. Diet is more complicated than that. But the issue that I have here is with the framing. The experts were wrong. All of them? Which ones? Was it universal, or was there actually still conversation and dissent?
Right.
And who figured out that it was wrong? Were those also experts? Has the consensus changed over time? These are the ways that science actually progresses. Instead, what Rowan is representing is there was a monolith that was wrong, but Rowan and a handful of other people who've been on Rogan, they were right. These individual mavericks overturned the monolith of expertise. This is the Galileo maverick fallacy.
Next up, they're talking about cigarettes.
But the other thing is also less stress. They're not as career focused. They're more family oriented, very tight knit family groups. They eat dinner together. There's a lot of laughing, a lot of drinking wine. A lot of them smoke cigarettes. You go over there, like the cigarettes never went out of style over there. They're all smoking cigarettes. And you're like, how are you guys so fucking healthy? This is weird.
Yeah, it is. It'll be interesting on cigarettes if it turns out that in a certain context, they're not that damaging. And then out of that context, they're super damaging.
I have heard that with polyphenols. I've heard that, and this is, I think, controversial as well, but it's cigarettes taken along with olive oil. And that a lot of these people have high olive oil rich diets, and that cigarettes along with olive oil, that the olive oil tends to balance out whatever damage that the cigarettes are doing.
That is super interesting.
Yeah, which kind of makes sense.
And it's going to be like everything is going to be something like that. Where it's bad in a certain context, and then it seems to have been okay for people in a different context.
Yeah. Are there any other things that you've noticed?
Anything else? We need to carry on the conversation, man. Anything? Just tell me anything.
You got anything?
But no, so what we're at here is like, cigarettes might not be bad for some people. It's literally the thing that I was saying about how, well, my grandma smoked a pack a day her entire life and she didn't get cancer. Therefore, maybe cigarettes weren't bad for her. Or maybe she just got lucky. You know, you can't legislate for who's going to get lucky or not. It's all about likelihood and percentages and things. And, you know, what Joe says in response is that he's heard that smoking while having olive oil balances out the damage of cigarettes. And notice that Rowan responds with, that's super interesting. He doesn't respond with, I'd have to look at the evidence for that. He doesn't respond with, Jamie, can we check that? Can we put that into Perplexity and see what the AI thinks about that? There's no contesting of that. It's just like, sure, absolutely. This is health contrarianism. Everybody thinks X, so I think Y must be true. You know, to the point where we're even potentially denying that cigarettes might be harmful. You can smoke cigarettes and maybe you won't get cancer if you get lucky. But the chances are you are more like your incidence of getting cancer, you're likely to get getting cancer and various other diseases, emphysema, stuff like that, significantly higher. It's one of the strongest associations that we know that we have is between cigarettes and smoking. And then at the end, Joe was just like, can we talk about another topic?
Is there anything else that you've covered that we can talk about? It doesn't go on very much longer than that, actually. This is near the end of the interview. If this is the case, if olive oil is the thing that's preventing the cigarettes from hurting you, why not just do a bunch of olive oil? Like, why not just have a bunch of olive oil? Does that make you Superman? Or if you love olive oil that much, I guess that makes you Popeye. It doesn't make you Superman. But still, like, why not just do that instead of adding a bad thing in there to try to weaken the olive oil?
Well, but Popeye did do a lot of smoking. He famously had his little pipe quite often. But we didn't see him get cancer.
That's right. But also there was a cartoon, as I recall, where he says he uses it just to toot, that there's no tobacco in it.
Oh,
so
okay, fair enough.
I just want to say, I think even back then they were like, we don't want to show kids.
We don't want to show that.
Like a fucking guy who's constantly smoking a pipe. That's probably bad for kids.
Yeah, it's not ideal.
We were fucked up when we were kids. All right, next up. This next piece, this is talking about cacao and then oysters and then maybe a little bit of chi mixed in there. What do you say? It's our last clip in our toolbox section.
So, but what there's like antioxidants in it. Like there's a
ton. Yeah, it's good for you. It's totally good for you. It gets your heart beating a little faster. There's some happy drugs in there. It's got a tiny bit of cannabinoids in it, and it tastes great. So. You know, what's not to like?
Anything else? Any other foods or substances or different things that you found out that were beneficial?
Well, how do you feel about oysters? I wrote a book about oysters, too.
I eat them all the time.
Are you a fan?
Yeah, I like them. Are they okay?
I mean, they're great.
But?
There's no but. They're great.
Good.
But I think we haven't figured out why. You know, they're like, you know, you're eating like a little living being. Right. So I think, you know, there's like some chi factor there where the reason people get so excited and feel so good when they eat oysters, it's not because of like the nutrients. It's like there's something else that's in there, you know?
Well, isn't there zinc in oysters?
There's definitely zinc.
And they're supposed to have an aphrodisiac effect, right?
Yeah. So I think that aphrodisiac thing is like, it's more about the chi, like this living force that you're ingesting than the
This
than
sounds
the
like hippie talk.
It does sound a little, you know, like chi's going to get justified scientifically at some point.
You think?
Yeah.
Shut the fuck up.
Oh
real?
my God. There's just so much of this stuff that this guy just likes that he is confident would say, and that's going to get justified scientifically to the point that we're on chi. The idea of like an innate energy life force that moves untraceably through the bodies of living things in ways that we can't detect through any conventional methods, even though we have all sorts of ways of knowing how the human body works. Chi. That's going to get justified scientifically. What a coincidence that the thing you like is also on the cusp of being discovered by science, man. Jesus Christ. Yeah. And again, I'll also point out yet another example of Joe being so completely out of questions. Anything else? And I honestly, like this was at 1 hour 55 and he's saying, is there anything else? I wonder whether he just contractually needs to get to the 2 hour mark. Like I genuinely wonder whether he has a contract that says they're 2 hour shows. He hasn't done a show under 2 hours for a very long time. And I wonder if this is like, he is so scraping the bottom of the fucking oyster barrel to get to that 2 hour mark.
It's pretty amazing. First off, oysters are not always amazing. Tell this to the guy who recently got brain damage in Chicago by eating bad oysters. That happens all the time. He does mention that like some people die every year of it because of it. But this feels like it's reaching into that sort of, I don't know if you remember Joe talking to, I think it was Evan Hafer in one of the first few shows we did, where he's talking about how he loves elk so much because he can basically absorb its life force and he feels like the power of the animal when he eats it. This is leaning into that territory, but Joe's kind of punking it a little, which is funny because I would think Joe would lean into this. There's a chi or you're absorbing its essence sort of territory. I feel like Joe would normally embrace that sort of thing, but this is a weird place for a science writer to go.
Yeah, it really is. And I wonder if Joe is deviating from that because it's an oyster and not an elk. Like, you can imagine it absorbing the majestic, powerful energy of an elk, but like an oyster is just like a little snotty guy in a shell.
Let's wrap it up with that. Thank you, sir. Appreciate you very much. You're a beautiful person.
All right, Marsh, here we are, end of the show. Anything good in this program?
Yeah, it's hard because like I mentioned, there is a tension here in that there's times in this conversation that what he's saying isn't fully objectionable and they're rowing some stuff back along the way that I think Rowan would look back at this and say he's not made any recommendations, he's not said anything that's particularly outlandish or out there, or when he has, he kind of rowed it back. So like, I think there are times that's difficult to, that there's been some criticism that's difficult to level. Like Rogan, for example, talks about how it's good to be outside, but you've got to avoid like burning your skin. Rowan acknowledges that there's protection in like melanin and skin pigmentation, but that has an upper limit. And for some people, that limit's not going to be that high. That burning's very bad for your skin. If you're like fair-skinned, if you've got freckles, you're more likely to burn. So that's going to be bad for you. It hugely raises your cancer risk. So that stuff, he's not wrong about cancer in those kind of ways. There are times he does talk quite usefully about the need to stay out of the sun. But the problem is those times get sort of forgotten at the other times when they just overlook all that stuff because they're getting carried away. And I think that's where this gets dangerous. Because after the show, they can point to the bits where they say, make sure you don't get burned and make sure you do what's appropriate for your skin. But at other points, they're clearly telling people that if you go out and tan a lot, your body gets used to they use the words, the dose of sunshine, and therefore you're not going to burn. And that kind of message is going to leave people to take risk with their sun exposure. So there's some good stuff where they do issue some correct warnings, but I think that still gets overlooked by what they say at other points in this conversation.
This is one of those, I feel like these are more important episodes to listen to than the real obvious stuff, right? So like when you have on a guy, Rupert Lowe, we open the season with Rupert Lowe. Rupert Lowe is an obvious choice to be very easy to pick apart the arguments he uses. He's leaning heavily on conspiracy theories like the Great Replacement Theory. All that stuff is pretty easy to point out. I don't have to do anything to really point that stuff out. He's really blatant in his usage of that stuff. And it's also obviously really wrong and obviously really unempathetic and obviously really harmful. You know, all that stuff is really easy. When we catch some certain people, it's a lot easier. This is a really subtle episode. This is really hard to pull out and say, is this harmful? And when you listen to it as a whole and you walk away, is this going to convince people to make bad decisions? And I think like that's a really important thing to point out, because Joe's show can be subtly harmful all the time. Is this particular piece as harmful as vaccine denial? I'm not sure, because in some ways vaccine denial isn't just hurting you, it's hurting all the people around you because you didn't get a vaccine, right? I'm not helping with herd immunity if I don't get a vaccine. With sunlight, if I just follow this guy's recommendations, I might not be hurting as many people because I'm just hurting myself by following this stuff. So it's not as bad, but it's bad. It's not great. And the subtleness of it, I think, is the important piece to pull away from this, that there are shows that Joe does that may sound fine or okay at first listen, but once you really pay attention to what they're saying, they are and can be very dangerous.
Yeah, I agree. Well, that is it for the show this week. Remember that you can access more than half an hour of bonus material every single week for as little as $1 an episode. You'll get that early. You'll get that ad-free. You'll get it by subscribing at patreon.com/NoRogan. And remember that you can also hear more from Cecil at Cognitive Dissonance and Citation Needed. And you can hear more from me at Skeptics with a K and The Skeptic Podcast. And we will be back next week for a little more of the No Rogan Experience.
If you love the show, please rate and share it. If you want to get in touch with us, become a patron, or check out the show notes, go to knowrogan.com. KNOWROGAN.com.